Okay, so here we have the first of the ungraded exercises in the JavaScript class, the CSS manipulation exercise, and I'm just going to give you the solutions for that. So I just copied the instructions into the file so I can see them a bit easier when I'm demonstrating, and I've set up the console here at the bottom, so the regular JavaScript console, and this is the HTML file that we're working on, and here is um, the code, so we can see it all on the screen at the same time. First thing then to do was to change the color of the text in the paragraphs to red. So that should be fairly straightforward. I already set you up with the jQuery document ready function. So within here, we can just grab all the paragraphs. So we select, using the jQuery function, we select the P tag. Remember that anything you put in here is a CSS selector. So that's the P tag. And I'm literally just going to use the CSS function to set the color as red. And when I refresh the page, you can see that the first thing that happens is this fires, and the color of the text, the color of all the paragraph tags, goes to red. This function here, the CSS function, I think we covered in the class. It lets you pass any CSS selector in the first part of the function, the first parameter, and then a value in the second set of the parameter. And what it actually does, if you look at the HTML object, is that it selects, it adds this here. You see where it says style equals color red. This is in the DOM. It's not actually in your HTML, but it's in the sort of the structure that the browser builds from your HTML. It's adding a style directly into the element. Okay, so if you remember from the CSS class, this color.red is exactly the same as what we've seen in that class. So that's the first one, which we've managed to do. The second one then is to change the color of the H3 heading to orange. So we're going to do that in the exact same way. We'll select the H3, okay, and I'll pass orange, and there you go. The H3 turns into this awful orange color. And I left in the P, obviously, so it's still red, but I could also remove that, and it would not make that red anymore. Okay. Don't forget that this is a regular CSS selector, so a regular CSS property. So the red here and the orange here are the HTML color sort of keywords, but I could also pass in a hex value, for example, and that would work just as well, or an RGBA value like this, and that would also work just as well. Okay, so that's the second one as well. Third one then is to, when you click the button, I want to change the H3 heading to italic. Okay, so in this case I've said when I click the button, so we need to put our JavaScript inside a click handler for the button. We can't just do it immediately that the page loads. Everything that, you remember that everything that executes inside ready happens immediately when the page loads. So we're going to select the output button, which has got an ID of output. Oh, sorry, no. Has a class, not an ID. Up, there we go, of my button. Using the click handler, which we've seen then in the class, and passing an anonymous function inside, as we tend to do. The regular pattern in jQuery is this: these anonymous functions go in here. Then I can put the same code inside here, but instead of, I'm just going to get rid of this, don't need it anymore. But instead of selecting the H3, then what I wanted to do is select the, sorry, I still want to select the H3, but this time I want to change the italics. So I want to make the CSS, and if you remember from the CSS class, the property which allows you to set things italic is the CSS property font style with the attribute italic. So hopefully when I click the button now, the heading switches to italic. And if I keep clicking, it just stays italic, because every time it's just changing it to italic. And obviously it works in the same way. If you look at the HTML, you can see it's added this font style italic to the style tag in the DOM. Not in the actual HTML, but in the DOM file, in the DOM sort of construct that the browser builds. So then we have to add a CSS class which makes the paragraph text bold, and then when I click the button, toggle the bold text. So this one is slightly more complicated. So first of all, we go to our CSS, and we're going to make a class called isBold, where I set the font weight to bold. Obviously, by default, if I refresh, nothing has changed. But what I want to do is then inside my click handler again. So when I click the button, I want to add that class to the paragraph. So first of all, I select the paragraphs, and then I use this jQuery function add class, which has an opposite function called remove class. I'm just going to write it here so you see it. Okay, so that's this one would add a class every time I click the button. This one would remove the class every time I click the button, and then there's a final one, which in the sort of the set of three, which is toggle class. Oops. Which is the one we're going to use, because toggle means if the class exists, remove it. If it doesn't exist, then add it. Okay, so it's a sort of a shortcut in jQuery. Instead of using an if ourselves to calculate that, we can just use this nice class here. So let me save that and demonstrate. Okay, as you can see, what it's actually doing, if you look here in the DOM, it's not adding font style equals bold, it's adding the class. Okay, so it's adding this class to paragraph. Yeah. Okay. Now it says add a second button. When I click this button, toggle hide show all the paragraphs and the subtitles. So we can do that fairly straightforward. Add a second button. Doesn't do anything right now. And then when I select this button, sorry, I guess I'll do it in addition to. When I click this button, toggle hide show all the paragraphs and the subtitles. So what I want to do is select all the paragraphs and also all the subtitles. So I guess not the H1 because that's probably the main title, but all the others are subtitles, I would guess. Or maybe I'll use that class. Let me do that instead. Let me use this class. That would make more sense. Okay, so I select, and again, this is just a valid CSS selector, yeah, with a comma in it. That's totally fine. You can write a CSS selector like that, so therefore jQuery accepts it. And in this case, I don't want to toggle the class. I want to hide show all the paragraphs. So in jQuery, there is another set of three functions. You have hide, you have show, and you have toggle. And it's exactly the same as the add class, remove class, toggle class set of three. It hides the class, shows the class, hides the element, shows the element, and toggle, so if it's invisible, make it visible, if it's visible, make it invisible. All of this information is available in the documentation for jQuery. If you look up the documentation for jQuery, you should find, if you look in, for example, for toggle, you'll see that the toggle class thing here is documented, and you can see that you can give it two parameters, a duration and what to do when it completes. But you can also just use it on its own. Actually, it doesn't need to have any. And as you can see in the example, that's what they do. So we don't actually need to pass any value to that because we're literally just telling it to toggle itself with we can do the default parameters. So now when I click the button, everything disappears and reappears. And obviously everything moves up, right? The buttons move up because the DOM, because I'm toggling, it's totally just making the stuff totally disappear from the DOM. And then the final thing is to create a third button. Let's have a look. Okay. And the third button is when I click on it, use the method remove, delete all the paragraphs of text. Okay, so that's fairly straightforward. Just select all the paragraphs, and I use remove. And so when I click on that, the third button, what will happen is everything will disappear, and I won't be able to get it back. Okay, because remove, like if you watch the DOM here, have a look, watch what happens here when I click the button. When I click the button, the paragraphs are actually gone. They've been totally deleted from the DOM, and I can't get them back without refreshing the page unless I stored them somewhere in my JavaScript. Yeah, completely gone. There you go. That's how to do that exercise.